Hey kiddos, today we are going to be discussing how to solve quadratic equations. So let's go ahead and get to Alright, so what does it mean to solve a quadratic equation? It basically means that you're finding the value of the variable, which is basically the same as finding the x-intercept. So what you're going to be doing is you're going to set each of our sets of parentheses here equal to 0. Okay, and then solve for x, or whatever variable it is. So for example 1, we have x plus 3 times 2x minus 1 equals 0. So all we're going to do is we're going to break apart each one of these parentheses. So x plus 3, and then I'll set it equal to 0. And then 2x minus 1, I'll set it apart and make it also equal to 0. And then we're just doing basic algebra and solving for x. So here I would subtract 3 to both sides. Here I end up with x equals -3. And over here on the other problem, solving for x, I'm going to add 1 to both sides. Get 2x equals 1. Last step here is to divide both sides by 2. And I get x equals 1/2. So both of my answers are -3 and 1/2. These ones are a little bit more complicated because notice they're not already factored out essentially. So that means I have to do that first. So going back to factoring, we're going to have to actually work this out. So when we factor, remember the middle term here is going to be 0. So I need two numbers that are going to multiply to -64, but would add up to 0. The adding up to 0 means I know that one number is positive, one's negative, and I know that they have to be the exact same number. So I think -8 times +8 is -64, and -8 plus +8 does equal 0. So those are my values. When I rewrite my problem, I get x plus 8 times x minus 8. Notice I can go right into the step because the lead coefficient here is, yes, that's right, it's a 1. So I can go right to this step. So now that I have that broken down, in order to solve the equation, I would break them apart and make them each equal to 0. So in the first one, when I solve for x plus 8 equals 0, I'm going to subtract 8 to both sides. You get that x equals -8. Then in the second equation, when I solve for x, I'm going to add 8 to both sides because that's doing the opposite. And I get x equals 8. So my two answers are -8 and +8. 3, same kind of concept. Again, we're having to factor first. So my lead coefficient is 1, so that makes it 10 times easier. So I need two numbers that are going to give me the product of 21, but will possibly add up, will be the sum of 10. So two numbers multiplied to 21. 7 times 3 is 21, and 7 plus 3, what do you know, is 10, so that is my value. So because my lead coefficient is 1, I can go straight into writing it inside of my parentheses, being x plus 7 and x plus 3. Then to actually solve the quadratic equation, I would set each one of those parentheses equal to 0. So I get x plus 7 equals 0 and x plus 3 equals 0. Now it's basic solving for x, so I'm going to subtract 7 to both sides, and you end up with x equals -7. And then for the second equation, I'm going to also subtract here, but I'm subtracting 3 to both sides, and you end up with x equals -3. So my answer is, for this quadratic, is -7 and -3. All right, next example, same type of situation. Always remember to always look to see if there's a possible GCF that we can take out. If there's not, then don't panic. We can still figure this out. So 2 times -5, so I need a product of -10, but we'll add up to 9. 10, 5 and 2, No. So the only other option then is 10 and 1. One of those numbers got to be negative. Let's go with the 1 being negative. 10 times negative 1 is negative 10. And 10 plus a negative 1 does give me a positive 9. So those are our two values. Now, this one's a little bit trickier because the lead coefficient is not a 1 here. Okay? You do have a few options to figure this out. You can use the box method, or you're going to be doing this by grouping. So either way, you have to come up with you having 2x squared, and then the two terms that go in the middle are the 10 and the negative 1. So that's going to be positive 10x and a negative 1x. And then the other piece of information is the minus 5. Notice the beginning and the end I pulled from the original statement. Okay, so if you're doing the box method, then you would have those values inside of this box instead. And the nice thing of the box is it already sets the grouping for you, essentially. So with me doing this via grouping, I am basically making sure that there's a GCF between them so that I can take something out. Okay, so if I group it in this manner, 2x squared plus 10x, their GCF is 2 and an x. What's left over goes back inside my parentheses, which is an x and a positive 5. Now in the next set, what they have most in common is the negative, because they're both negatives. So I'm going to take out the negative 1, and what's left over is an x and a plus 5. So what you discover our answer is we have 2x minus 1 times x plus 5. Remember when we solved by grouping, these two values inside should be identical, okay? And that's how we know we worked it out. So this is what we end up with. And now to actually solve the quadratic, so it's basically taking it a step further, we would set each of those equal to 0. All right, so solving for x, I'm going to add 1 to both sides. You get 2x equals 1. Divide both sides by 2, and we get x equals 1/2. Okay, so we get 1/2. And on the second equation, we subtract 5 to both sides, and we would get x equals -5. So our two answers are 1/2 and -5. All right, for this next part, again, this is all kind of stuff that you guys have seen before. So hopefully this should be a recall. What if you cannot factor the equation? So we've had problems before we cannot factor them. So what that would mean then to actually solve the answer is that we would use the quadratic formula, okay, which is negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c, all divided by 2 times a. Okay, this is generally how all of our equations, quadratic equations, need to look. Okay, they need to be ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. Okay, so you cannot have a value, a number value or x value or anything like that on the other side. They have to have everything on the same side. So in problem number 5, you have x squared minus 6x plus 3. If there is no number in front of x, hopefully you recall and understand that is 1. So the first thing that you need to do is identify what is your a, b, and c, because that'll make your life 10 times easier for when you have to actually plug it into the formula. So a is 1, b is -6, and c is 3. Now, notice I've rewritten the formula with parentheses, because in those parentheses is where I'm supposed to put different values. Okay, so please get in the habit of doing this. I do expect to see this on your problem when you're working out problems using the quadratic formula. So, negative b, so b was a -6, plus or minus the square root of b, which is -6, minus 4 times a, which is 1, times c, which is 3, all divided by 2 times a, which is 1. All right, so now we're just going to break this down. Negative, negative makes that a positive 6, plus or minus the square root of. Negative 6 squared is negative 6 times negative 6, which is positive 36, minus 4 times 1 times 3 is 12. All divided by 2 times 1 is 2. All right, I'm going to break that down a little bit further. 6 plus or minus the square root of 36 minus 12 is 24. Divide by 2. Now, notice here, you can split this into 2 different problems. Okay, so you're going to split. Now, the reason why you can split it is because you have a positive and a negative. So it becomes 6 plus the square root of 24 divided by 2. And you have 6 minus the square root of 24 divided by 2. Okay, I am going to be accepting decimal answers, so I'm not going to have you guys keep it in the radical form. So use your calculator to get the decimal equivalent. So and any calculator, even on your phone, can actually do this. So you got 6 plus the square root of 24 is like 10.898 da 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 da. And then you divide that by 2, and we would have 5 point. Let's round to the 100th spot. So you get 5.45. And when I do the other one, 6 minus square root of 24, you get 1.1010. And then if I divide that by 2, I get 0.55. So the answer to this solved quadratic problem is 5.45 and 0.55. Notice, remember, we're going to round to the 100th spot. Okay, now let's look at the next problem. You have x squared plus 2 equals 0. I notice that I have something missing. I know that my a value is 1, but my middle term is missing. There is no just x, so that means b is 0, okay? And my c is 2. Now let's plug those into our handy-dandy formula. So negative b, so negative 0, plus or minus 0 squared minus 4 times a times c, all divided by 2 times a. All right, now let's let's break this down. Negative 0 is simply just 0, plus or minus the square root of 0 squared is 0, minus 4 times 1 times 2, 4 times 1, that's negative 4, negative 4 times 2 is minus 8, all over 2 times 1 is 2. So you end up with 0 plus or minus 0 minus 8 is negative 8 over 2. There should be a big red flag coming up, and the reason why you should have a big red flag is because you have this square root of a negative number. This goes into the imaginary world, and we're not going to be dealing with that. So if we cannot go any further from here, then essentially this quadratic has no x-intercepts. That would be our answer. So this quadratic does not even touch the x-axis at all. All right, and our last problem here, which I'm actually going to let you guys work out on your own, but I wanted to help you guys out real quick because hopefully you notice you have 5x squared plus 7x equals 3. So this is not in the standard form, which means I had to move the 3 by subtracting it to both sides. So I wanted this side to cancel out and give me 0 because that's what I want. Notice the minus 3 you cannot combine with the other two values. So you just simply write it like so. 5x squared plus 7x minus 3 equals 0. And that's what you have to have first. Based on this, you have your A, your B, and your C. You should be able to plug it into our formula and give me our final answers. All right. See you guys later.